this pinched off. I'll mention this in the disassembly part of the video, but I have this pinched off because if you unpinch this, you're gonna lose all your fluid in the reservoir, and I don't really feel like putting that in a bucket and then keeping it. So I just leave that there until I'm finished, and I plug this back in, and then I take this off. Or else it gets messy and I have to refill it, and just an extra step. Alright, now that you have everything removed off of the bumper, I went ahead and I trimmed off a portion of this. It stuck out about 2 inches. I trimmed about that much off of technically the core support. This flange on this side was hanging down past the wing about that far. You don't have to do it. This just allows for a little bit more tire clearance. You can see it allows the inner fender to come up a little bit more, and aesthetically it looks a little bit better when you tuck the inner fender in, because it gives it probably about an inch more of clearance. I didn't cut this side yet, but you could see how I'm already limited right there on the inner fender. It could probably go back up another inch or so after I trim that off. And then I also I tucked these wires up out of the way, just zip tied them out of the way because they were hanging down here. I rotated this ground so these ground wires weren't hanging down here too far. And same thing on this side. I went ahead and tucked up all these wires out of the way because they were hanging around here, which is going to be hanging below the wing. And I also trimmed this side. You could spray paint this black, or I went over with the white paint pen because you can't really tell with the white paint pen that has been trimmed. And then I did have the wings mocked up already, so I trimmed here. You don't have to do that yet. You can wait until everything's said and done to trim those. And then I also trimmed a little bit off of this. You can trim this while the bumper's on before you put the plastics on. It was just slightly touching the center, and it allows for better airflow into the intercoolers. And then these shims I put on first before I put the center on. And what I did was, you could tape this on, or you could 3M it. I put 3M in the back and just stuck it to here so it stays on while I put the center on. And I did that for both sides. And then I already have the winch installed in the center, so I'm going to go ahead and throw the center on now. Alright, I now have my center section on. I installed the winch ahead of time as well. You might have room to get this in here after you put the center on. I always just put it in first, and I have a couple people help me lift it on while they get the bolts in. And then I have the winch wires ran down this side. And then I actually took this piece off and I drilled a couple holes in it. And then that's just so I can get zip ties around it. And your winch wires are going to go up in between the core support and the radiator right there. I try to zip tie out of the way, away from the radiator, just so the wires don't get hot or melt or nothing. And then I also have all of my bolts in as well. So right now I have this bottom one and this top one tight, so the bumper is flush against the frame. And then I also have this 7/16 bolt tight as well, so it's lifted all the way up. And then I double checked my measurement by measuring from the base of the frame bracket down there, and then when the hood is closed it sits about here, and just make sure it's even all the way across. I try to get it within about 1/16 of an inch. Anything more than that, the wings on both sides change pretty drastically. There's not too much adjustment in the wings because you want the wings to fit pretty flush against here. And then now I'm going to start throwing the wings on. Let's see. These are your nut plates for your wings. They are left and right. Let's see. And then they're going to sit on the inside of the bumper like this. So they're going to be on the inside right here. I usually just use some 3M or some tape just to hold them in place while I put the wings on, and we'll do that for both sides. And these are going to be 3/8 bolts. Alrighty, so now I have my wings installed. I have them flush with the top, pretty lined up as much as possible, and also as flush as you can get it this way, whatever looks good. And then so for the winch, if you have it come up, they are clockable, so you can clock the clutch handle, and you can actually put it right here if you would like. The only downside is the clutch handle right here, you don't have any access to this on and off button. We do have a video on deleting this button, and you don't need to turn it on and off, and then you still have room for the clutch handle. In this case, we opted to leave it here since there's still enough room to get in. It can be fairly difficult if you don't know where the button or how the clutch works. But if you do know how it works, you're comfortable with it, it's not too bad as long as you know where the button is, because you won't be able to see it and know which way the clutch disengages and engages. Alright, I went ahead and I got my fitment dialed in. I made sure that made sure everything's clear. I trimmed the inside of the intercooler plastics a little bit more. And for the measurements I took, I went from places that can't really move too much. The headlight's fine, but that also bolts in, so it can move a little bit. I went off the fender to the bumper from like here to here, and I did go off the headlight just because they were both pretty even. And then I also went from like the inside where the 7/16 bolt is to like the hood, even though the hood moves a little bit. But I think everything's within about an 1/8 inch right now, which is good. And then let's see what else. So for the wings, basically just made sure this was flush, and it was also flush on the inside of the bumper as well. And then I started with I snugged this top bolt down, and then this one down too, but not too much. And then I tightened it up with a 7/16 bolt up top, and then I used these shims to shim it, so it's actually against something. I think I used 2 on this side and 1 on the other side, but every car is going to be different, or every GX will probably be a little bit different. You might not need shims, you might need more shims. But I went ahead and I stripped the harness off this bumper, inside of this bumper, a little bit ago. But I did want to mention to mark everything. So this is the passenger side plug, along with like the parking sensors as well. I get the passenger side, and then I even make sure I have the passenger side middle marked, and then along with the front radar and the camera, and then like the driver middle driver, and then this is the driver side plug. I also took the grill shutter out, which is these bolts in the corners right here. Up there is 6 of them. They're all 10 mils. Took the grill shutter off just to be able to unplug this stuff. And then you really won't be reusing any of these like zip tie clips, so you can go ahead and snip these. Make sure you're not actually cutting the wire. Use like diagonal cutters or flush cutters or something. And then some of them are taped up, like this one you could just kind of cut with a knife or some scissors. And then I'm going to show you, and then also like the fog lights. We won't be reusing these fog light plugs because we're going to do auxiliary fog lights. So I filled them up with some dielectric grease so they don't get corroded, and then I just taped them up and then taped them out of the way. And that was for both sides. And then I also went ahead and took the fog lights out as well. So when we cut the bumper, they're not in the way. And then I removed the factory parking sensor holder bracket thingies. They just stick on with some 3M. So what I do is I get it super hot with a heat gun, like almost to the point where the plastic's melting, and then I peel them off with like a screwdriver gently. It'll probably be too hot to the touch. You could probably use gloves, but a screwdriver and a little bit of prying work, because that heats up the 3M pretty well, gets it nice and soft. And then when you do cut the bumper, make sure the headlight washer lines, just make sure they're out of the way. You can actually leave all these clipped in though. You don't have to remove any of these. This where it plugs in, it does hang down here, so when you do cut the bumper, make sure it's like tucked out of the way. Alright, I'm going to be installing the triple fog lights soon. If you order these with their front bumper, they come with a harness for 2 of them, because they come in sets of 2. So what I did was I just staggered them, and I used 3 because you're getting 3 per side, and then I had those go into, I should have made a video on how I did this, but I had the 3 positives and 3 negatives go into a positive and a negative. I used 12 gauge OFC wire, and I did this for both sides, and I heat shrink the wire as well. So if you order 3 sets of these, you'll get 6, and you'll do 3 per side. And then each harness only comes with 2 Deutsch connectors, so just use 2 from one set and then another one from the other set. Pretty simple. And then I loomed it just to make it look nice. And then you'll have 2. You can make 2 of these. I mean, you can do however you want, but this is probably the easiest way to do it. And then I'll show you how I did the wiring in the second for the stock harness. Alright, this is how I ran the wires. I just have the camera and the radar plug in the middle, and then I ran the harness down the side of the wing. There's zip tie holes up here, and then I used the factory, I don't know if you can see that or not. Let me grab my flashlight. I don't have my flashlight. Factory parking sensor holders to hold the parking sensors. I have my triple fogs installed, and then I also installed the light bar as well. If you're curious how I ran the wires, I ran them up above. There's like some zip tie slots up here, and that's just so they're tucked up behind the wing, and you can't see them through here very much. You can see a couple, like the wires from the triple fogs, but they just go straight up and then sideways, and that allows for airflow, and so you don't see them. Same over here, I have them tucked up, so you can't really see them through this vent either. And then so my triple fogs, my light bar wire, I just have ran up here and then across the core support, and then same on this side. Same thing, and then I also have my winch wires going up. I zip tied some holes in this plastic piece, put some zip ties through it, so I have all my lights coming up through here and up into that gap right there. I zip tied them as far away from the radiator as possible, just so they don't get hot or melt or anything, and over time the heat cycles can make the insulation on the wires brittle. And then for the camera and like the radar, just make sure you have enough slack up here to plug it in. And then once you have your plastics trimmed and everything, you can zip tie all the slack out of the way, and then make sure you have no wires in the way of your clutch handle or your on and off button. They'll most likely get zip tied over here. That's the same with these wires. Make sure they're far away as possible so you can reach up through and you still have access to the button and everything. And then what else did I do? Pretty much it for now. I'm probably going to go ahead and mark the plastics out. I plugged in the plugs on both driver and passenger side, and then after your plastics are trimmed, you can plug in your headlight washer tube, spare tube. Alright, so for the measurements for your cut on your plastics. So I measured from this line right here on the bumper up to 3 3/4, which would be to the tape right there. And then for this one, I measured from the bottom of this line right here straight down to where this tape is 3 1/2. And then on this side, from this line straight up to where that tape is, again, this is 3 5/8. And then from the bottom of this line right here straight down and then over is half of an inch. And then you can mark that and run a tape line and then measure the tape line again, and then you'll be cutting along the bottom of the tape. I also wanted to mention you're going to be cutting right here next to this tape and on this slot too, and you're going to be cutting the top of all these slots on this one. And then for the back piece, this plastic piece back here, this should come off with a couple screws. Once I get this cut, I think there's only a couple clips holding it in. I think we're gonna try to keep this. I will keep you updated. So yeah, you'll just cut in between here. Alrighty, I finished trimming up these plastics. This is the inside of that bumper. But one other thing that I did have to take off was this trim. I had to trim this piece off. It was pretty much sat like right there. You could see it was rubbing the bumper right here. So I took those off. I took that off. And let me flip this around real quick. Alright, this is the front of the bumper. To cut it, I just used an oscillating tool, and then to clean up the edge, just a deburr tool is fine. Let's see, deburr tool like this with a sharp blade, and then so that works pretty well. And then I think I measured about 5/8 up from this touching the bumper, or from the bumper to this, and then that was my final cut line. So I cleaned this up. I'm gonna throw some edge trim on now, and then these pieces that I cut off too, they're a little rough still, so I'm gonna sand these down, make sure they're smooth. Probably go over it with a paint pen too, so it looks, so you can't see that it was really cut. And then I'm leaving the tape on right until I finish sanding those down to prevent me from scratching around it. So I'm going to clean that up and I'll throw it on, and then I'll get the flares cut as well. I have the front clip trimmed up, and probably going to trim this a little bit more. You want about an 1/8 inch gap all the way around, not touching the bumper. So the back side of this edge trim or bulb seal is kind of touching a little bit, so I'll probably trim this a little bit more. But I trimmed 5/8 from the bumper up, and that was my final cut line straight across. And then I just matched the flare with the front clip. And then now, before you put your top plastic piece back on, you could plug your radar and your camera in before that. And I still have to put the grill shutter back in anyways, so this is going to come off. But before you put this on, put your grill shutter on, and then plug in your camera and your radar. Update on the 550. I've done a couple things. So I don't know if I mentioned this in the last video, but I did put the grill shutter goes back on before you fully clip this on. Make sure I don't know if I mentioned this or not, but I measured 5/8 from the bumper to the plastic and then made a straight line across. That gives me about 1/8 inch gap on this bulb seal right here. And then I did the same thing with the flare as well. And then I kind of just tried to make it as smooth a transition around this flare as well. I might trim it a little bit more. This is a little bit under an 1/8, but an 1/8 gap is pretty good. So that helps keep, so when you flex this out, one end is gonna go a lot higher, and that keeps the bumper from pushing on the plastic and popping it out of place, because the body mounts on these have a lot of give to them. And then I ran the, like I said previously, I ran the winch wires up through that way, and then those will come out through here. And then I also have the triple fog lights and the light bar wires here as well. On you'll run, you don't get lights and you just get the winch. I typically on these I'll run them through there, and then like along the factory harness right down there. And then I don't know if you can see that, but I basically run it underneath here and then up underneath this plastic piece, and then loop it straight up, and then that gives you good access to your positive and negative. I like to have the negative down here and then come up, and then the positive I like to tuck it back here and then have it go on sideways. And then I'm pretty sure usually I do switch pros on these, so we don't normally keep these, but it shouldn't be too hard just to trim one corner of this and still have it clip in, as long as you retain enough clips to keep that on. If you are doing like a switch pro and you're mounting stuff up here and you have so much accessories going to the battery, it's really not that important to keep this, as long as there's nothing touching it. And then I will also run the triple fog lights and the light bar wires the same way as I did the winch. This guy is getting a switch pro, which we have a mount that'll be mounting here. And then for the tie-in skid, right here, don't mind that. I use, these are M8s, and then you'll have a nut plate that goes on the inside of the bumper right here on both sides. And then for the factory skid plate, so you'll put the tie-in skid plate on first, and then with these two, and then you'll there's a 10mm spacer, so you'll have a 10mm nylon spacer. It's going to go in between the tie-in skid plate and the factory skid, and then that gives it that small little gap here that keeps it from rubbing the powder through, and then also gives the factory skid plate a little bit of give, because there is like a just like transition here. So if you don't use that, it's going to be kind of flexing the factory skid. And then those two are M8s. And then the last four back there on the factory skid plate, reuse the factory bolts on the factory skid plate. There's 4 of them. They're 10mm. I think that's pretty much everything for now. I'm going to do the inner fender tie-ins through here, so those will bolt up through these holes, and then also bolt to here as well. And then once you get everything plugged in and clipped in, and you know your plastics are going to stay on, that's the last time you clip them in, you can go ahead and plug your headlight washer fluid hose back on, and you can unclip this. If you pinched off the hose, because if this wasn't pinched off, it would have drained all the fluid out. I pinched it off before I unplugged it, because I didn't feel like filling up like a bucket or anything. And then you could plug that back in, and then plug the grill shutter back in, and then the radar and the camera back in.